I'm going to start by talking about the power of AI for supply continuity. Now, this is brought to you by Scoutbee, and Scoutbee is an incredible partner of SIG because they're never going to come with a light content for you. They always bring a packed agenda. So today I get to introduce you to Maria Saenz, PhD, Executive Director, Digital Supply Chain Transformation Lab at MIT. She contributes almost 20 years of academic and research experience in supply chain and logistics, and is currently examining collaborative paradigms that arise when implementing AI and the new digital technologies in supply chain. So welcome, Maria. Also, Chris Sawchuk, a dear friend of mine. I've known him for years. He has over 20 years of experience successfully advising hundreds of Fortune 500 as well as mid-sized companies across all industries globally. Now, Chris is the principal and global practice leader, procurement advisory at the Hackett Group. He's also cited regularly in business publications. He's a frequent presenter at industry events. He's authored numerous research papers and a member of the advisory boards of several developing companies as well. Then we have Jon Hansen, who's the founder and chief editor of Procurement Insights. Also, he is incredible. If you don't know him, he's a sought-after speaker, writer, and moderator. He's a two-time Ottawa finalist in the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award. He has over 40 years of high-tech industry experience and almost as long in procurement. Jon's recognition as one of the top 50 in procurement influence globally reflects the value he brings to our industry, and we just value his friendship as well. And last but certainly not least is Jason Busch. Now, if you don't know Jason, you probably haven't been in procurement very long, because Jason is an entrepreneur, an analyst, an author, passionate about technology, procurement, and economics. He is also the CEO and founder of Spend Matters. Today, Spend Matters, if you don't know, please make sure you look them up after we're done today. It's the leading source for data-driven intelligence spanning the procurement, finance, and supply chain, technology, and solutions ecosystem. So it is absolutely amazing. They follow over 200 technologies any given day, 200 just within our space. And then after 17 years of independent growth, Spend Matters joined forces with Copley Equity Partners in 2021 to further expand its vision and accelerate its market growth. Prior to Spend Matters, Jason goes way back to the early free markets days and then Ariba. And he has just been an incredible just a mind that you really need to know. So if you don't know Jason personally, you need to make sure you know him, but more importantly, you need to know Spend Matters as well. So now, folks, thank you so much for everyone who's coming in from East Tennessee, Concord, Taiwan, Buenos Aires, McCook, Illinois. This is incredible. We have an incredible audience. What I'm going to do now is invite all of our panelists on screen, and Jon Hansen is going to be your moderator. So I'd love for you all to come back on and make sure you unmute yourself as well. And I'm going to go off screen. Now, folks, please make sure you have your Q&A opened at the bottom of your screen, and make sure you type in any questions as they come about. And Jon will be making sure to be focused on your Q&A as well as moderating. So panelists, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here. What an incredible group.
Thank you. Thank you, Dawn. I'll tell you, it is an incredible group. And what's amazing with the amount of time we've been in this industry, I think it's only safe to say that we all started when we were about 12 or 13 to get into this field here. So we're not old. We've just been around a long time. How's that? Anyway, let's start off with right out of the gate, because we have a tight timeline. In what ways can AI help ensure supply continuity? Now, that seems like an obvious question. I'm going to go to you first, Maria. Maria, what do you think about when you hear that kind of a question? What are the first thoughts that come to mind? I mean, supply continuity has always been a big thing. What does AI do? How does it help to ensure better?
Yeah, I mean, we can start, first understanding what AI is, right? Is a way of just, simulating human behavior, right? The human action. So then, but again, in terms of supply, in terms of continuity, risks is important. But then the machine, the algorithms are better than the humans just to assess how repetitive things happen, how the math works. And so then this is where, when AI can really help, then it can, of course, strengthen your supply network from many, many different angles. Then it can enhance also your capabilities working together with the suppliers, right? So then how you can anticipate certain disruptions and how you can anticipate how you are going to work together, collaborate together in order to react in front of disruptions, because AI can help you to scan the real world in real time for you, right? And then then can gather all the information and then to project how this can affect particularly to your context, to your situation, to your particular business. So this is in a nutshell how I anticipate how AI can help. But we're going to go deeper into all these topics. I would like to hear also from the other panelists.
Well, and you know what? Let's go to you, Jason, because I mean, as Don mentioned, you've been around since free markets in the early days. I mean, supplier continuity is not a new challenge. How has it progressed the technology? What's so different about it now versus when you first started and you looked at leveraging technology? I mean, is it more user intuitive? Is there what are the advances of this?
Do you know? Well, yeah, I would say if I go back 25 years and I channel the early free markets years, you know, we literally did internet auctions with TCP and TCP/IP and modems, and we literally sent out notebooks to suppliers to bid. So it's amazing what's happened in that time. I would say a few things. I would say number one, if we can think about AI and supply continuity, it's a check on feelings. I consider myself pretty learned. And being learned, I realize how much I don't know and how much I don't know about supply markets, given how they're changing all the time. So as humans, you know, we tend to go on gut, even if we have, you know, a lot in our heads and library around decisions. So in the world today, making decisions, given how fast things change, right? We don't know what's going to happen with China and Taiwan, for example. We can begin to model, you know, different scenarios if disruptions occur because of global events, but it can help us check our feelings and our emotions around actual data and actual modeling and help us avoid from going on instinct. The other piece, which I just think is massive, is that it's 100x or 1000x magnifier on speed. You know, back when I was at free markets and we began to start with combinatorial auctions, you know, we had to think about and have debates with our clients and internally around the constraints we might try and model. Now, if we think about constraints in sourcing decisions, for example, we might work with our teams and come up with a few based on past experiences. You know, we might want to have certain inventory levels if we're going with new suppliers. We might want to think about different lead times, but AI can help us think through very quickly all of those possible constraints given global events. I mean, it's unbelievable if you begin to play with Bard and ChatGPT and others, and you do the web plugins, how you can begin to look at and model things very, very quickly. And that translates into different, very specific initiatives. So risk management in the supply chain, commodity and category strategy, supplier discovery. So it's a way to do things much better. It's a way to do things quickly, and it's a way to check our emotions and feelings, because I'd say the smartest people in this industry don't, know what they don't know. And it's a way to be on top of the here and now.
Okay, now this is an interesting point because I want to bring you in on this, Chris, and thanks, Jason, for that, and Maria. But one of the things that's interesting is that it still requires human intervention here. I mean, processes and understanding. I mean, it's a partnership. And I remember once standing up in front of an audience of 300 auto manufacturers, and they were saying, well, how do the algorithms learn? How do we do? Are we going to just be replaced? There's this blind fear of replacement. But the reality is we have to be actively involved with the AI, don't we? We have to have the processes and the groundwork and the framework, not only to set it and help it to learn properly, but to also be able to interpret what it's telling us. I mean, is that a reasonable thought?
It is. And I think, one of the things that you look at AI is the combination or the integration between autonomy as well as AI. And I think what you're highlighting is that, there's this interface that still exists, interpreting, some of the recommendations that might come out of an AI generative type of capability. And then what do I do with it? And do I need to action it, or can it be done autonomously directly from the AI? And I think those are some of the things that scare people is, more than anything is when we completely take the human out of a stream of work that's not just knowledge-based work, but also process-oriented work that can be done autonomously with instructions from an AI engine. Now, one of the things that's interesting, and I know, Maria, you know this, some of the research that I'm doing, and outside of Hackett, I am continuing and taking too long on some of my doctoral studies. And the study that I'm doing is really looking at, this idea of black swan types of events, things that are not necessarily predictable. And, a couple of things that were interesting. I remember speaking to, one of the individuals, the CPOs in the medical device industry, because my research is specifically focused on the medical device industry. And one of the ways he was describing a black swan event to me was what I would characterize not necessarily a black swan, but it was unknown to him because of the lack of visibility. And I think one of the real key things in terms of some of the AI is just getting deeper in understanding. His comment to me was, Chris, there are things that are happening from a continuity standpoint in my fourth tier of my supply network, and I don't know about it until it happens and it gets to me, and I have to react to it. I can't plan to it. Now, and one side you argue that that's something that we could potentially know, and I think that's one of the powers of generative AI and just having access. Maria was talking a lot about that, having the ability to visualize the entire network itself, to stress test that network against various events, as you simulate it across. It requires an immense amount of data. It requires an immense amount of connection. But the other thing is to architect a network based on the objectives of the company. Now, the last thing I'll just say is, as you talk about the relationships, one of the things that has come out of my research, and, again, this is what people think today, is that as you go down, many of the executives I was talking to believe that the relationships are still very important in the network, even though as we start to, sort of think about what that future is with the connectedness, with the advances in AI and the ability to, connect and know and simulate and architect, et cetera, within the network itself, that the relationships are still important. So as you look at that, I do believe, at least for the foreseeable future, those relationships are still important within that network.
Okay, now before we get to the next question, Maria, I'm going to add something there because, Chris, you raised a couple of interesting points. The audience, we have our poll up now, and it'll be up for a few moments. Where are you in your age or on your AI journey? Are you planning? Are you started? We don't know where and how to deploy it. If you could take a few minutes to respond to that. And I want to integrate this into the question here, but one thing I want to add, Chris, and Maria, this was interesting. When you mentioned black swan event, Chris, you always equate it with being a bad event and, a terrible thing, but let's look at the example. Let's say Peloton. Peloton was when the pandemic started, it was a black swan event, but Peloton actually got bowled over by the fact that they could not keep up with orders. Demand was great. It highlighted weaknesses in the chain. They talk about repatriating manufacturing and all of those other factors. I mean, if you look at that, Maria, aren't we really talking about the difference between descriptive versus prescriptive knowledge or intelligence or data? In essence, not just telling us there's a problem, but actually helping us to be able to solve it. Do you know what I mean? Somebody said to me, Peloton had all the information available. It's not that they didn't have the data. They just didn't recognize what the data was telling them. Does that make sense? And is that where AI comes into play?
Absolutely. And actually, the problem is that then we expect perfectionism in the access to the end-to-end data, right? This is kind of a wish we have. And then we have to assume that then perfect end-to-end data is not going to happen, period. So then, but we can build on having a good scenario to start assessing what are our options. And the beauty of AI now is that these scenarios can be almost in real time. So we can gather data from different sources, then in order to what is going on about disruptive events, for example, changing the currency in certain regions. So we can pull this data into our models that are proactively prepared in advance with our groups So then AI can help us to predict what will happen in the future, but also, for me, the most important thing, AI can help us to learn from this disruption. It's going to suffer. It's going to happen. Yes. We are going to suffer. Yes. Are we prepared? Not 100%, but we can react. But what has happened after our reaction? What has affected to our KPIs? What has affected to our key learning indicators, building the capability of resilience? And then if we learn, we will be able to go to the next stage with a loop and tell our AI models, hey guys, I mean, we know why happened this. Let's go deeper into what, I mean, just to have a picture with data and with KPIs about what happened in the past. And then we will be able to learn and then to rebuild our networks in a more dynamic manner in order to manage the next black swan in the future. So this capability of learning from disruptions, from data, is the most beautiful thing of AI and also the most dangerous from, let's say, where the fear is coming from. Because then we need to be super active in order to be able to learn from whatever kind of source that AI is giving to us. And then, so it's expensive. We need to put a lot of mirrors in order to learn from all these different angles, right? And yeah, but I think it's the beauty and the opportunity here.
Well, you see, that's an interesting point because I want to get into some actual case studies of AIs or examples of AI. But Jason, looking at the poll result, hearing what we were talking about, looking at the poll result, I mean, more than 52% don't know where and how to deploy it. 29% are just starting. It seems like everybody's still on the sidelines, even though we've been talking about AI. I mean, what do you think is the obstacle to that? And can you give an example that maybe helps the audience look at this and say, as we move to our second question, how did they use AI to ensure supply continuity?
Yeah, I think right now, given how early we are in typical enterprise adoption, and we can call it, enterprise, middle market, SME, typical procurement organizations today, a lot of folks we speak to are still figuring out how to get started. In reality, if they're using off-the-shelf SaaS technology, they're likely using some type of AI without knowing it in different places. So that could be probably most prevalently in contract analytics. Solutions have been using not Gen AI, but capability to extract and make sense of complex global contracts, for example, for many years. But if I think about where we are today in terms of the state of generative AI, I'm going to date myself here. But when I was younger, I was a pretty serious road cyclist. And I remember the Tour de France in 1989. That was kind of the famous year that Greg LeMond beat Laurent Fignon in the time trial at the end. And all of a sudden, he brought a brand new bicycle that nobody had ever seen before. It was aerodynamic. It had aero bars, using disc wheels at the time. Crazy innovations. But if we think about what's happened with AI, literally in the past 6 months, and I consider myself a student here playing with it all the time, we've not only seen that evolution in cycling, but we've also seen in the past 30 years in cycling, the lightweighting of bicycles. We've seen in professional cycling as well, really looking at the whole athlete in terms of diet and sleep and training in different ways. All of that 30-year evolution in cycling has happened in 6 months already in AI. So if I think about, the Gen 1 earlier this year, when I was playing with ChatGPT 3.5, when I was playing with Midjourney, which is images, and I was playing with DALL-E, also images. And I look at how it's evolved today in terms of the large language models, literally just in a few months of evolution, it's night and day. It's improving all the time. So I would say today, in the past 6 months, we've got into what I'll call Gen 2 AI. So it works extremely well to play around in these different areas. I think what we're going to get to in the next phase, outside of just procurement, is really the merging of different types of models. And I'm not a data scientist, but we'll be able to, for example, not just think in one context. So, for example, chat or audio. And get an answer back, but we'll be able to ask our systems to produce charts. We will be able to ask them to produce, for example, training videos out of a chat prompt. we'll be able, for example, and I know we probably won't do this, but imagine an image to visualize supply chain risk, right? And we're not sure what we're going to get back necessarily, but I think we're going to see a mixing of these mediums. And again, I would tell everybody who is an athlete or has watched professional sports over the years, we've seen 30, 35 years of evolution literally in 6 months. So it's coming fast and furious.
Okay, now it's kind of interesting because I was going to ask Chris, but I'm going to go to Maria first. But I was going to ask Chris, are we AI ready? You talk about data and information, but Maria, I mean, maybe building on what Jason said, and then I'll go to you, Chris. I mean, actual tangible results. How do we move this from conceptual understanding of opportunity and power and move it into something that we can say, okay, now we've seen how it solved the problem, and then we'll go to you, Chris, because I want to go back in on this.
Yeah, I think that we can bring here some examples, very interesting examples, right? And then the most recent big black swan was COVID-19, right? And as you mentioned, Unilever has been a great example. So the Unilever has deployed the Scoutbee solution during the COVID in order to be able to find new suppliers, right? In order to be prepared for supply continuity in a proactive manner, in order to decide, okay, this supplier has, then we assess in advance. So then they possess these certain capabilities. We can think about sustainability capabilities, operational, financial, ESG kind of, framework. And then we assess in advance. And then we are ready, right? When we need them, then let's deploy them directly. And the Unilever relied on a Scoutbee platform for doing this. Right, and it's a good example how they were learning. They identified 180 collaborative manufacturers just only in the US in a very short period of time. Another good example is Siemens. Siemens also, they adopted the beautiful Scoutbee platform. And then for me, the most interesting of Siemens are the numbers, right? So then they supported 18 business units. They identify more reliable and potential and powerful, 6,000 suppliers, right? So which is a big figure. Imagine how you will need to do that with a phone, right? And then, so this is the beauty of AI. In real time, you can assess and reassess, and especially how they can, connect with your current network, how they, not these suppliers isolated, but how they can, be integrated in your network in this proactive manner that Chris was mentioning when a black swan happened, or when other kind of not black swan kind of disruption, maybe a potential risk in the market, or maybe a new product that we are going to develop. So then AI is a reality. AI can be plug and play. And then, of course, there's a huge potential, especially in the supply base, in the supply continuity.
Okay, now this is an interesting point, and then we're going to get to our poll too. But Chris, I want to tie this back into you. Listen to what Jason said, seeing what Maria said. We almost have a start to finish in there. How does a company get ready to be able to be AI ready? We've looked at technology, and I think technology has always taken a bad hit. Back in the old days, garbage in, garbage out. It's not going to fix a bad process, all of these other elements. How does an organization get themselves strategically ready to accomplish the outcomes that Maria referred to?
It's a big question, and I'm just going to touch on a few different points. One is data. If we went back and Jason, talked a little bit about his history, and I think any of us, we go back, a couple of decades, we didn't have the data. Why? Because we didn't have the systems to capture things and digitize them. In many ways, generative AI is emerging now, and even AI, years ago, because of the fact that we've readied the environment. I live down here in Tampa, Florida, and one of the things that you see and hear a lot about, especially this time of year, is hurricanes. And you'd say, well, what's the environment like down there? Well, one of the things that, people are talking about is that the Gulf is, the temperature of the waters are higher than it has been in many, many, many years. That's fuel for hurricanes. And so when you see these hurricanes that come across, it's the fuel is there. And, as I look at, generative AI and AI, what's the fuel? The fuel is the data. And so that's one of the things that were sort of the foundational precursors to allow this to emerge where we are today. But the other thing, and I'm going to go back to one of the things that Jason said, is the people aspect. He highlighted an analogy talking about biking and the bikes and how they developed and the technology of those bikes developed over time. But at the same time, it moved on to the human, the person who was actually riding that bike, their training, their diet in terms of strength, all the different things that they can go do as well. And I think that's an important point. The idea that there's this blending of human and machine technology that allows us to work. And so, one of the other things that you have to think about from a readiness standpoint is the people that are engaging with this. Jason talked and we highlighted a little bit about, the fact that, this is going to have an impact on roles and things that we do today. But there is a opportunity for us to blend the human capability and the technology together here. Right? And so there's a lot of work to be done in terms of, as knowledge workers, et cetera. How does our role have to change? How do we participate and enable this environment to work well together on a go-forward basis? And there's other things, obviously, the objectives that you have as an organization, developing, AI use cases or where you want to use it, that's aligned to what you want to do in the organization. I've seen this in the past. I mean, too many organizations go out there and they just do a bunch of experiments and there's no business thing. I'm not against experimentation. You have to look and imagine what is the art of the possible, but at the same time, make sure that what you are focusing on is driving something that is actually critical within your environment and is part of the objectives of the enterprise as well.
Okay, so you see now that sort of segues nicely into the third question is, how do you lay the foundation to be successful with AI? But, in general, I mean, what do you, they call it laying the foundation to unleash the potential power. When you look at it, I mean, and I'll go back to you, Jason, I mean, what are some of the foundational things that, we've sort of touched on? We covered the gambit and the range here, and the clients or the end users who are looking at using this are looking to solve a problem. What are some of those foundational elements you have to put in place to get to the point of having AI, to get to the point of it learns, to get to the point you'll be able to understand and use that information? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just from a Maslow's hierarchy of needs perspective, right? If we think of how we subsist as humans, at the very base layer is shelter and food, right? And drinking water. And I think what companies first have to do is have some kind of governance structure and framework for what they will do, how they will use it, thinking about data security as well. I mean, sort of motherhood and apple pie stuff around it. But in terms of getting going, I think a very easy way to divide it is how will we evaluate AI in external technologies we can bring in, which are a component of the technologies, whether we use the technology vendors or not today, or their new ones. And then what will we develop internally ourselves? And, I'll be the first to say, in the past, many companies have tried to create their own procurement systems going back 30 years. Generally a bad idea, right? It seems every year or two, we still hear about companies trying to build some type of P2P or AP system on their own. Again, probably not the best idea, but there are things you can build yourselves internally to get started and try with AI too. So again, start with governance, but think about how can we evaluate external technologies, which we can source and use, whether we work with those vendors today or new ones, and then internally. And beyond that, very specific roles. So one way I like to think about it is if you could have 3 czars in the company, you probably have somebody focused on what can we automate? So the automations are, how can we think strategically? So things like supply risk, sourcing, category strategy, contract strategy, the strategies are, and then a tactical czar in everyday activity, which our procurement teams face. How can we think about using AI from a tactical perspective as well in tactical procurement? So that's just one kind of framework to think about it, but it all starts with having a governance structure internally, very much as we have it for cyber and security. So working with the IT department working with the CIO around governance at first, because that gives us a permission structure from which we can build an experiment.
When they see that's an interesting point, that governance model, because I want to go to you, Maria, now with the building on what Chris and Jason said about the governance model. Rob Hanfield talks about data governance and governance of supplier relationships. We talk about all of these elements. But let me throw a statistic back in 2019, and it's an older statistic, but certainly came from Deloitte global survey, where they talked about the fact that the majority of CPOs were not satisfied with their digital transformation strategy. And it wasn't the technology's fault, so to speak, or problem. So how do you set up that governance? How do you set up that foundation to achieve success? What is that governance that Jason and both Chris and Jason are referring to? What does it look like? How do you even start? And should that be the first step?
Yeah, this is typical, right? So we have been running in my digital supply chain lab here at MIT. We have been running more than 40 case studies to understand what is going on in supply chain organizations. And then the most successful cases starts with a strategy, right? How do you envision your supply chain in, let's say, depending on the business, but could be 5 years time, could be 3 years time, right? Or could be 10 years time. And then once you envision what you want, then, okay, what is the technology that you need? What is the data that you can get access to? And then how you redesign your processes and how do you convert the people, your relationships, right? But then a strategy should come first. And the strategy now is happening more in a more agile manner, right? Because you have the language of data that then you can use using AI in order to feed up your strategy and to understand, okay, this is working, this is not working. So then in terms of the governance model that then can support this strategy, I think that is important, especially for taking advantage of all the beauties of AI. The most important thing, I think, is the performance panel, right? If you are focusing on being more responsive, right, in your supply chain. So, of course, one way is that you connect closer to your customers, but also you connect closer to your suppliers upstream, talking about supply continuity. But then, so what are the KPIs, the key performance indicators that are helping to connect more dynamically with your suppliers? Because it's the way to impact responsiveness, right? And then you share these KPIs, this responsiveness upstream with your supplier, right? And then maybe they can contribute on that. And then you quantify the gains, right? Because maybe a supplier is making a lot of effort, a huge effort, and then you need to recognize this effort somehow. Otherwise, he's going to be tired of working with you, right? So then this all gain sharing, value sharing approach with your suppliers, it depends on what is your target, what is your key performance indicator. And another important indicator that is very important in AI, because AI is learning. And as we discussed before with Chris and Jason. So learning with the humans that are behind could be the more strategic guys, could be the consultants that are helping to deploy your digital strategy, but also they can learn together with your teams, right? So all this mutual learning needs to happen using the math, because at the end of the game, AI is a math engine. So the math works well if you tell the math where to go, right? And then the learning will happen, right? This is quite intuitive, but this is how AI works. So if you tell the AI, then this is my anchor points, these are my KPIs, right? Please help me to discover how I can improve it in A, B, C scenario based on history, based on forward-looking scenarios. So then you build your key learning indicators. Learning means that then how you are progressing with AI, right? And then if you are comfortable with that, it's not perfect, don't expect 100%, you will have errors, it's okay. And then you experiment and you enjoy the journey because you see how it's affecting your KPIs working with your suppliers upstream or with your customers downstream. So for me, going to your question, governance requires a strategy first, and then a good set and sometimes new set of KPIs.
All right. So now let's go back to you, Jason. This is an interesting point I want to throw in here. Because again, you've been around a long time as well. The old days of technology and the bugs and the basic MAI basic 4 days of industry-specific apps. You knew the software was not all created equal. You know the technology was not created equal. In today's world, to help organizations set up with governance, it's not just the technology a company offers, is it? It's the expertise behind that technology. And with that expertise, what role does the provider, the solution provider, have in helping to bring that governance model and the effective use model to light? Do you know what I'm saying? It's not like a plug-in. Everyone has technology. We don't have to worry about technology not working now. What we have to worry about is how smart it works and how do we get the intelligence to make it work. And I think that comes down to the individual provider, doesn't it? Or am I off base?
Well, I would, going back to the previous framework of, we're going to build some things internally, or at least experiment. Maybe we never adopt them. And we're going to work with external providers. I think for the internal piece, we need probably a deeper governance framework and structure. With third parties, honestly, they're doing a lot of the work for us if they're using AI. So the same questions come to mind around, making sure that, is my data secure? I mean, the same things we would have looked at for years. And are we a design partner, or are we using something which is already generally available? If it's available, I really wouldn't worry about it as much, because it's been tried already in terms of what the provider is offering. So I wouldn't be as worried if the provider is bringing it to us as if we're building it ourselves. But again, I would go through a very similar checklist to how we evaluate technology in general and our comfort level.
Yeah, that's a good question. Sorry to cut you off, but going to you, Chris, and listen what Maria and Jason had to say. And I'm going to introduce a question into this mix now from HM. What could be a good example of key learnings indicators? So you've got the end user market asking these kinds of questions. Where do they get these answers? I mean, they should have it within themselves. But obviously, many organizations may not be AI ready. They may have different roadblocks along the way. That's where they'll come to the provider. So what would you say would be a good example of key learning indicator that you can give them direction on, or at least start them on the path?
Yeah, and let me just clarify, John, that I understand the question. When you say a key learning indicator, are you talking about AI learning? Is the system getting better over time? Or are we looking at other KPIs? Maria talked about sort of broader KPIs.
That's a great question. HM, listen to what Chris had to say. Which of it is it? I mean, we can go in two different tracks down here, obviously, KPI and key learnings. We're talking about either learning AI, or we're talking about the indicators and performance of AI, correct? That's what you're...
Well, I would also, I guess I would look at this as, the AI, and if you look at that as an indicator, it's a driver, right? I mean, sort of you have these cause-effect relationships between KPIs. And, as a business, as a function, as my suppliers, there are things that are important to me, right? It may be that I need to improve my margins as an organization. And how does that propagate down to procurement in terms of what we're going to do to help with that particular enterprise objective? It may be that, we need to create a more resilient supply base to deal with some of the risk issues, the protection of continuity that we dealt with over the last couple of years. And so the question is that if I have AI in the environment, how fast am I improving those objectives? Because to me, that would be an indicator in terms of how AI is learning as it helps. One of the comments I made before is that you can do a lot with AI. And, I use the example that I've seen people in the past. I remember this pharma company that went out and when a CPO came in, and, it was interesting because they were doing a lot of experimentation with bots and all the kinds of stuff. If you remember, you go back 5-10 years ago, they were doing a lot of these things. And it was always interesting because they'd speak at conferences and all those types of things. Say, wow, that's cool. Nobody else is doing that, et cetera. Well, the CPO from another company came in and looked at all this and said, none of this is having an impact on our business, and got rid of all of those things because it was all experimentations. It was fun stuff to go do, et cetera. It wasn't having an impact. So I think you have to go back to those measures that what are we measuring on the organization, and then look at how is AI enabling that. And as it learns over time, it gets better, then I ought to see a corresponding impact on those measures, those KPIs that are important to me as a business.
Okay, now this, Maria, I'm going to come back to you, and then Jason right away as well. G mentioned that, how do you go about vetting potential AI providers in comprehensive and disciplined manner? I think that's important. But if you look at it, Maria, and hearing what Jason and Chris has said, I mean, the state of readiness, in the past, it seems that there has been an abdication of responsibility for outcome. We're going to automate, put in the system, and life will be great. And the reality is that it really is a partnership between the practitioner, the provider, and the stakeholders within the organization. I mean, how do you assess the provider's ability to become part of that equation? Because obviously, if we just say, here's new technology and it's great, I may like a Lamborghini, but I sure as heck don't know how to drive one. So, I can't use its full features. I don't know if that's an oversimple analogy, but do you know what I'm saying? How do we do that? For example, data readiness. How do we do that? Because one of the problems you said with deployment is the lack of data, not a lack of having amount of data, but being able to know what to do with it. I mean, how do you address that and partner properly?
Yeah, I always put this analogy of that using data is like, learning a language, right? At the beginning, you don't know, and then you don't have enough words, and you don't know how to connect the words, right? So that you don't have at the beginning enough data. But the data is there somewhere, right? It's there, but you don't know how to find it, how to take it and put it and plug and play into your thing, right? So then it's a journey. So you need to keep learning, keep experimenting, keep practicing, make mistakes with your sentences, and then you get in love with a boyfriend that is from other language, so your practice is perfect, right? So then all this, practice of data, right? And then it's just how you learn, and then you need to experiment. For me, the phenomenon of Gen AI, ChatGPT, all these LLMs models is a great, fact and event that is happening to us, because then everybody's experimenting with that, which is great, and it's learning that then you need to be careful, because then Gen AI can hallucinate, but also can do very good things for you. And then coming back to the Chris point, if you customize to what you want, and this is the most important point. Right?
All right. So now I want to go to you, Jason, because this is an interesting point, and Chris, to keep the conversation going. Somebody just put up there, please provide simple examples of implementation within supply chain and how they work. And, the first thing when I read that question, Jason, it was looking at the first poll result where 52% aren't really doing anything with it. They know it's around them, but it's not doing anything. And then, 20-something% is sort of like starting on something. I mean, like it's almost like there's a desire to use AI. There's a pressure to know you have to use AI, but how do we actually get about doing that, especially when it comes into supply chain? That's where these examples come in. I mean, what would be a simple example of AI? I mean, it doesn't don't have to mention company names for saying. I know Maria covered that, but just a simple example of where somebody can say, this is how AI worked in the real world.
Sure. And I think on some levels, we're making a mountain out of a molehill here, to use a cliche.
Okay.
Basically, every tech firm you're working with today is experimenting with AI or using AI. And if the company was founded in the past couple of years, you can bet their solution is incorporating it in lots of different areas already. And there are some tried and true use cases in procurement, which have been around for a few years. I mentioned at the start of the webinar, contract analytics. If you're using a contract management solution today and you're doing any type of work around contract discovery, whether it's on your paper or supplier's paper, there's likely some type of AI component. It may not be Gen AI, but it's already in place, already in use to help you make sense of contract data and contract metadata. So that's one example. Another example, which has been in use for quite some time, is fraud detection and monitoring, especially with card spend, right? If we're using card spend in our environment, we're likely working with a T&E provider who's using a third party, which will monitor for fraud. We also see it as well on non-card spend in terms of fraud detection and monitoring within accounts payable. So those are just two examples. There's lots of others. Tail spend management being one as well, in terms of being able to go out very quickly and not only get bids quickly from suppliers you might not even know, but even do basic, simple negotiations with a supplier. Okay, you've offered me a 5% discount. What if you gave me a 7% discount, or you gave me extended payment terms? Lots of solutions in play like that, which will do that for you already. So this stuff is already here. I think the more curious and interesting and exciting use cases really tie more broadly into very strategic areas of procurement, which are emerging around category strategy, sourcing strategy, and the like. But it's here already. And that's one thing I would think is critical to leave people with.
Right. Well, and that's a good point. I want to take that over to you, Chris, because one of the things, it's all around us. Let's face it, AI isn't something that's coming. It's already here. We're already seeing it in many different ways, shapes, or form. If not in our procurement or supply chain function at work, personally, we see AI everywhere. It pops up, it reads, it anticipates. So in the context of what Jason said and what Maria said before of the use cases, why are 52% of the people still on the sidelines?
Why?
I figured you'd know.
I think it's a typical adoption cycle of most technology. I mean, you always see the bell-shaped curve, and you have those early adopters. AI, as Jason has highlighted, and Maria as well, is not new. It's been around for some time. What's new is more the generative aspects of AI in terms of creating new content. I think, in that particular area, a lot of organizations are in that exploratory phase. And when you tend to look at a population of organizations, you are going to have those organizations that are going to adopt things much more quickly. And, I do have organizations that are what I would say fairly far along in terms of that adoption or exploratory arena. Some of them are, as Jason mentioned, all technologies are using AI in some way. They're incorporating it. They were founded based on that. But then there's also the whole domain of just using, sort of like RPA when it first came out, create a bot. And so there are domain specific kind of, you liken it to the bots that we had before that, we are developing to do certain things in many ways to fill the gaps between some of the technology that we have today. We did a survey, more recently asking organizations in terms of, where do they believe they can adopt technology? So we didn't ask, specifically, what are they doing today? But what is that? And number one, I have to read it because I don't remember these by just knowing them. But number one was supply market intelligence. And so you can imagine going out and, having a generative AI, connected not only to your internal data, but external data as well, keeping them separated, et cetera, to create the kind of intelligence that you need to inform a strategy, around a category in particular. Number two was contract management. Jason highlighted that. Not only, things within that whole process of the contract itself, but more importantly, engaging with that data. Answering questions like, there's a lot of things that we can go do that are more, I would say, logical extensions of that, using that data, but even, providing insight in terms of when's the most opportune time to go to market. That's a complex question. Where might we get the best advantage in the market, in the supply market, if we were to go? These are things that are, I see as possibilities going forward. Bid optimization, negotiations, and even, as we get into certainly the risk management area. So these are some of the areas that people rated in order in terms of where they see the greatest applications looking forward.
All right. Now this, and by the way, you've seen a poll pop up on the screen, and we now have the results for it. But when you actually look at the questions that are being asked in this poll, for example, who is driving your transformation towards utilizing AI in procurement? I mean, are you surprised, let's say, Maria, with some of the answers? It's not coming from the top, but it seems to be coming from the CPO isn't doing it. It seems to be coming from director of procurement or procurement excellence center, whatever else. I mean, is that disconcerting that it's not coming from the top? Because don't you need the buy-in from the top to help to drive that?
Yeah, I mean, this resonates very well with the research we have been doing, in which, I mean, you need to get the support from top down, right? So then again, there is a budget for this. We want to do it. We want to explore. We provide some room for exploration, right? And experimentation. But it should come up bottom up. And why? Because bottom up is, I mean, all your middle levels, they know what to expect and how to customize the journey for the particular business and the particular relationship. So then bottom up means that then you bring your processes, you meet your expectations and your visions about your procurement, how you need to establish relationships with different categories, and then how the managers know their business, right? And then they need to transform all these boundary spanners, as we call it, right? So then those that are, I mean, connecting in a company upstream with certain suppliers in certain categories, they need to transform themselves a little bit in order to be comfortable with sharing data, with understanding their synergies, with, I mean, forward-looking scenarios saying, okay, this could happen in this region because then we see that the currency is being down. So let's anticipate with my suppliers what is going to happen. And then they build data, not perfect again, data, boom, this is the scenario. Let's quickly discuss, right? So then again, for me, it's great that then the companies are doing, I mean, very bottom up. And this is definitely how is, as far as we have found, how is happening most successfully in the companies.
Okay, well, you know, Maria, and listen, I've gotten enthralled and drawn into this conversation. I've got a friendly warning that we're coming to the 5-minute mark of our time left together. One thing I want to point out, and then I'll come back to the panel, is that, and maybe get your feedback on this. Number one, you don't have to start big, you can start small with it. Like, for example, and our host Scoutbee has just launched an AI co-pilot to allow for you to interrogate the existing supply base. I find that an interesting term, interrogate. But when a disruption hits, you're already able to decrease the time of recovery because you know who to work with from who portfolio. I mean, so if you look at that and then as data sets get added to it, and we talked about AI learning, it becomes more capable. You can expand from there. I mean, based on that step-by-step process, Jason, I mean, it makes sense then to sort of like start small. It's like that flywheel concept in Good to Great. Start small, gain traction, and build it up rather than going big right out of the gate. I mean, would that be advice you would give?
Yeah, I wouldn't overthink it. Even backing up. This is here. You know, I love the chat, by the way. I hope the chat here is archived. There are so many different use cases for AI today. I saw somebody mention material price forecasting. I know 3 startups being built on that, right, using AI to do material price forecasting right now. And I would not overthink it. I think what really scared me, though, the one thing that scared me in this whole session today was 8% of people said the CPO is driving this. If the CPO is not fluent in experimenting himself or herself with this, they should be. So if you're a senior executive on this call, start playing around later today or tonight. You need to be fluent in this. It's here.
All right. Chris, I mean, do you share equal surprise about the lack of CPO involvement? I mean, I agree 100% with Jason. How can you not be involved and take the lead in that? Because any initiative, not just AI, requires top-down leadership rather than pushing up from the bottom kind of thing, doesn't it?
I absolutely agree. And you know, what's even more scary, we had done a poll more recently, I'll just say, and there was a percentage, I think it was about a third, that don't see and it will not be focusing on AI within their environments. And I don't believe that this is an area that you can ignore. You know, similar to what Jason said, you have to. This is happening whether we like it or not. And you have to be aware. You know, however pace you go in, it's going to be somewhat dictated by the company that you work for. It's hard to sort of push the ball uphill. You're going to have to go with the pace of the overall enterprise. But that was probably the most surprising thing to me, that it's almost being ignored in some organizations. Maybe this will all go away. And I think that's, you know, it's a very risky perspective to have as a leader, as a person within a supply management organization.
All right. Well, listen, you know what? I could go on forever. We have a question from the audience. What are some good platforms that can provide training and knowledge on using AI in procurement and SCM? Would be a reasonable question. I would direct you, because we're going to be running out of time. VK, I direct you to check out SIG and certainly start there. It's a great place to begin in terms of that. But again, the emphasis on all this, I think, is we have to have CPO involvement from the top. We have to look at AI as being, not this mystery thing that's coming, like a Stephen King novel, The Mist. It's here. It's already around. We have to then practically understand where it can be applied, our role in making it work, and choosing the right provider. That's how I would end up. Does that make sense to everybody, or am I way off the mark?
Yeah, and facilitate resources for that, right?
Perfect.
This is also important to experiment. Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, thank you, Jason. It's great to share time with you, Chris, as well, and Maria. I turn it back over to Dawn.
Thank you. That was fantastic. And it could have gone on for a lot longer, but we only asked for an hour of your time, and we're going to honor your calendar for that matter. Yes, we archived the chat because it is fantastic. So we will be sending that out. And then, folks, if you have questions that didn't get answered, please make sure that you send them to Destiny, who's been communicating with you about today's webinar. She'll make sure that everybody gets those questions and we get the answers out to everyone. So with that, I want to thank our esteemed panelists. It was fantastic. I always love what Scoutbee brings us. They are cutting edge. And if you don't know Scoutbee, you need to get them on your radar and you need to get them in your portfolio. And Chris and Jason and Maria, so wonderful having you here today. And Jon, fantastic moderation as usual. So folks, have a wonderful, wonderful day ahead of you, or evening, wherever you are. And with that, we're going to sign off, and we'll see you on the next Power Hour.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.